They put Sergeant Dara Mose through the machine at 0600 on the 43rd day of occupation, and the machine told them everything it thought it needed to know. She stood inside it for 11 minutes. The assessor, that was the Veth word, the closest approximation humans had managed before the translators locked in. It meant something closer to the thing that sees through, was a column of pale violet light that passed through you in layers. First the skin, then the muscle, then the bone, then whatever the Veth considered the deeper architecture, the neural lattice, the blood chemistry, the fear markers. It was not painful. That was the most unsettling thing about it. The complete absence of pain, the clinical serenity with which it took you apart and cataloged you. Dara stood with her hands at her sides and looked straight ahead at the far wall of the processing bay. The wall was made of a material the Veth used for everything, pale gray, slightly luminous, with the faint texture of something biological. She focused on a small irregularity in it, a small dark speck about eye level, and she thought about the smell of her grandmother's kitchen in Suva. Fried bread, the specific quality of light through louvered shutters at 7 in the morning. She held those things in her head the whole time the violet light moved through her, because she had been told by the soldiers who came through before her that the machine could read surface-level emotional states, and she did not want to give it her fear. She gave it her grandmother's kitchen instead. When the light went out, the Veth administrator on the other side of the processing bay made a sound in its chest. A wet click, repeated twice, that the translator rendered as something approximating a throat, clear. It pulled up a display that Dara could not read, angled toward itself, and studied it for a moment. Then it looked at her. The Veth had no eyes in any sense humans recognized. They had 3 light-sensitive pits arranged in a triangle on the upper portion of their facial structure, and when they looked at you, all 3 oriented in your direction simultaneously. It was not a comfortable sensation. Mose Dara, the administrator said, its translator rendering the words in flat, over-precise English. Battle rank sergeant, Western Pacific Theater. Age 31. Mass 62 kilograms. It paused. Tibial fracture, left leg. Improperly healed. Chronic inflammation in the L4-L5 spinal region. Bilateral hearing loss in the high frequency range. Left ear worse than right. Moderate protein deficiency. Minor contusions consistent with recent physical impact. You got all that from 11 minutes of light? Dara said. The assessment is complete, the administrator said. It did not answer her question because it did not understand the question as a question. It understood it as a statement of fact requiring no confirmation, which told her something about how they thought. You will be seated. A consultation will follow. There was a chair, human-sized, which meant they had done their research or confiscated one, set in front of a low table. Dara sat. The administrator settled across from her, its posture that particular Veth configuration she had come to think of as professional. The upper limbs folded across the mid-body, the lower pair of limbs arranged in a precise symmetrical stance. The long pale neck held at exactly the angle their formal communication protocols demanded. It looked, she thought, like a secretary about to discuss her employee benefits. Your physical maintenance needs have been evaluated, the administrator said. I will now present options. Dara looked at it. Options. The spinal inflammation is a chronic condition requiring ongoing intervention. We have cataloged 3 tiers of treatment. It activated its display. Small geometric shapes appeared in the air between them, color-coded. Blue, yellow, red. Tier 1, full restoration. Neural scaffolding, targeted cellular regeneration, complete resolution of the inflammatory cascade. Projected recovery, 14 of your planetary rotations. This tier requires a significant resource allocation from your individual credit account. I don't have a credit account, Dara said. All humans under assessment have been assigned credit accounts. Your current balance reflects labor credits earned in the processing compound since intake. The administrator moved one of the geometric shapes. Your balance is insufficient for Tier 1. I will continue. Tier 2, symptomatic management. Pharmacological suppression of the inflammatory cycle. This does not resolve the underlying condition but maintains functional capacity. Moderate resource allocation. Your balance can sustain approximately 90 of your planetary rotations of Tier 2 intervention before depletion. A pause. After that point, the account would require renewal through continued labor contribution. Dara looked at the geometric shapes floating in the air between them. Blue, out of reach. Yellow, 90 days bought at the cost of working in their compound. What's Tier 3, she said, because she had to ask. The Administrator made the chest click sound. Tier 3 is resource neutral. It involves no ongoing cost. Dara waited. Given the cumulative systemic burden of your injuries, their trajectory over time, and your current resource allocation profile, the assessment calculates a favorable cost-outcome ratio for palliative cessation. Another pause. The translator rendered the next phrase with the same flat precision it used for everything else. This means a medically assisted end to your biological function. It is the most economically rational solution given your current parameters. The room was quiet for a moment. Through the far wall, Dara could hear the low harmonic hum the Veth ships made when they were running atmospheric processors. A sound she had lived with for 43 days, a sound she had almost stopped noticing. Almost. You're offering to kill me, she said, because I can't afford the good option. I am presenting a financially logical outcome based on the assessment's evaluation of your resource profile and your projected. I heard what you said. Dara's voice was level. She had spent 6 years in the Pacific Theater, keeping her voice level under circumstances that would have unmade a lesser person, and she kept it level now. I just wanted to make sure we were both using the same words. The administrator blinked or performed the Veth equivalent, a rapid triangular closing of the 3 light-sensitive pits. The assessment does not use emotional language. It identifies optimal allocation patterns. Right. Dara put her hands flat on the table. They were calloused, she noticed. They had been calloused before the occupation, and they were more calloused now. She had a scar across the base of the left thumb from a piece of shrapnel outside Honiara 3 years back. She looked at it for a moment. And this machine of yours, the one that did the assessment, did it tell you that I helped take out 4 of your armored units at the river crossing on day 16? The administrator consulted its display. Battle record is outside the scope of the assessment. I'm aware, Dara said. I'm just mentioning it. For context, she stood up from the chair. The administrator made a sound. A different sound from the chest click, something higher. A note that her translator rendered as an alarm-adjacent signal, possibly a query about her compliance. Dara ignored it. I'm going to go back to my bunk, she said. When you've figured out a Tier 1 option that doesn't require me to indenture myself to you for the rest of my life, let me know. Until then, I'll manage. The assessment is final, the administrator said. The options I have presented are the options available. Your biological function cannot be sustained without intervention. Dara stopped at the doorway and looked back. I've been managing my biological function since I was born. I managed it through 2 wars and a bad marriage and 3 years in a jungle eating lizards when the supply lines went dark. I managed it for 43 days in your processing compound. She paused. Your machine told you about my spinal inflammation. Did it tell you what I did about the tibial fracture 3 years before I ever met you? The administrator said nothing. Its 3 eye pits were all oriented on her. I said it myself, Dara said. With a stick and a piece of communication wire and a bottle of local anesthetic I was saving for the wounded. It healed wrong, like your machine told you. But it healed. I walked 40 kilometers on it the next week. She looked at the administrator one more time. Your machine doesn't have a tier for that. That's a problem. She walked out. The processing compound had been a port facility before the Veth arrived. One of the large cargo handling installations on the edge of the harbor. Repurposed now into a staging area for what the Veth called population assessment, and what everyone inside its fence called something less clinical. The buildings were a mix of human architecture and Veth modification, that same pale biological material grafted onto poured concrete and corrugated steel in ways that looked like something grown rather than built. There were around 400 people in the compound at any given time. Soldiers, civilians, a mixture. They had been processed through the machine on intake. A quick scan, a tier assignment, a credit balance that started negative because the Veth counted the resources of capture itself as a debt, and now they worked. Harbor labor, mostly, loading, sorting, the logistics of an occupation that needed to move a great deal of material. Some people had been through the full consultation Dara had just sat through. Most hadn't gotten to Tier 3, a few had. Dara found them in the corner of the eastern yard that had become, by unspoken agreement, the place where the people who'd been offered Tier 3 tended to congregate. There were 7 of them. She knew all their names now. Corporal Yusuf Abara, 44, former combat engineer, arthritic hands and a heart condition the machine had flagged as progressive. He was doing something with a piece of wire and a piece of metal salvaged from one of the harbor cranes, his thick fingers moving with a deliberate patience that belied any story the machine might tell about them. Private Amisato, 22, right eye gone since day 11. A fragment, not a weapon, just the random cruelty of things falling. And what the assessment had apparently classified as a traumatic stress burden, severe enough to degrade her projected labor productivity below the threshold that made Tier 2 viable. She was sitting with her back against the wall, her remaining eye tracking Dara across the yard with an alertness that didn't match the machine's calculation at all. And then there was Marco Ruiz, 63, the oldest person in the compound, who had been a harbor pilot before the occupation, and was now technically a resource-neutral proposal in the Veth's accounting. He was sitting in a square of afternoon sun with his eyes closed and his face turned up toward it, and he was faintly humming something. A tune Dara didn't recognize. Something from his childhood, maybe. Or his mother. Or just a thing he had held on to when the machine told him what it thought of his worth. He hummed it the way people hum things they don't even know they're humming, which meant it was coming from somewhere below the level where the fear lived. Dara sat down next to him. "How'd it go?" he said without opening his eyes. "Tier 3, she said. He opened one eye. The back, and the leg, and the protein deficit, apparently." She paused. "They have a very efficient machine." Marco made a sound that was almost a laugh. "They do. It told me my cardiovascular output is 40% below projected parameters for a male of my age range, and that the cost to bring it to acceptable function is beyond my credit profile." He closed his eye again. It used the phrase projected remaining utility. "Like I was a piece of harbor equipment due for decommission. Did it offer you the third option?" With the most pleasant tone I've ever heard anyone use while suggesting I die. He hummed a few notes of the thing he was humming. "I told it I was going to think about it." Dara looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "Same thing I've done every morning for 63 years, Marco said. "Wake up. That's the plan. Just keep waking up until something changes. And if nothing changes, keep waking up anyway." He tilted his face a little more toward the sun. "They can run me through their machine 100 times. They can show me every number in every color they want. That thing doesn't know what a 63-year-old harbor pilot, who's decided he's not done, yet actually looks like. It doesn't have the data for it." Dara was quiet for a moment. Across the yard, Yusuf was still working his piece of wire. Amy had her knees pulled up, and she was drawing something with her finger in the thin layer of grit on the ground. The 400 people of the compound moved and worked and rested in the ways people do when they're calculating how to still be alive tomorrow. "What's that tune?" Dara asked. Marco was quiet for a moment. "Song my mother sang, about the sea. I don't even know all the words anymore, just the shape of it." He hummed another bar. "She was from a fishing village. She said you should always have a song in your head when things go badly because then the bad thing doesn't get all the room." Dara filed that away. She had a song somewhere. Probably. She'd need to find it. The Veth administrator, whose designation translated as something like Assessor 7, was not, by Veth standards, doing anything wrong. This was important to understand. Within the entire architecture of Veth civilization, what Assessor 7 was doing inside the processing compound was not only sanctioned but optimized. The assessment system had been in continuous operation for what translated to roughly 900 standard years of Veth development. It had processed populations across 14 occupied territories. It had, in that time, refined itself to an extraordinary degree of accuracy. Its tier assignment error rate was less than 1/10 of 1%. Its cost-outcome models were considered among the most sophisticated tools in the Veth administrative toolkit. The assessment did not make mistakes. The tiers were not suggestions. The logic was not cruel, it was simply complete. A population of finite resources had finite options, and the optimization of those options was a function of mathematics, not morality. Morality, in the Veth developmental model, was a stage species passed through on their way to rationality. Most species made the transition within a few hundred years of technological maturity. The Veth had assumed humanity was approaching that threshold. The confusion the assessment was generating in the human population was therefore a technical anomaly. Assessor 7 reviewed the data from the afternoon's consultations for the third time. The rejection rate was unusual, not unprecedented. There had been populations in the earlier expansion that demonstrated elevated refusal patterns, but unusual for this stage of a standard occupation. Normally, by day 43, The population's compliance index was trending upward as individuals began to internalize the logic of the tier system. The humans were trending sideways. Some were trending down. The one who had left mid-consultation was noted in the file, Moza Dara, Sergeant. She had stood up, made several statements that the translator had flagged as non-compliant, and walked out of the consultation without the session being formally closed. This was not physically possible in most occupied populations because the consultation rooms were secured. But the assessment had recommended removing physical coercive controls from the human compound because the models showed coercion-generated suboptimal compliance at the rates required for long-term labor extraction. Let them choose, the assessment had said. They will choose rationally. They were not choosing rationally. Assessor 7 was not alarmed. Assessor 7 was incapable of alarm in any emotional sense. What it experienced was something closer to a recalibration event, a sense that the model required additional data. It submitted a request for an extended consultation with the anomalous cases. It noted in particular that Dara had referenced a self-performed medical intervention as evidence of a characteristic the assessment had not cataloged. The characteristic was not in the database. Assessor 7 added a flag to the case file. It would later understand, the first of many things it did not have the data for. The second consultation was scheduled for the morning of day 47. Dara arrived because not arriving would have had consequences for the people she was trying to keep alive, and she had done the math on that the same way she did the math on everything. Assessor 7 was not the same administrator from the first consultation. Or it was. It was impossible to tell from the outside, the Veth being physically near identical, unless you had spent months learning the micro-variations, which Dara had not. But it held itself slightly differently, the posture at the consultation table more oriented toward her, the eye pits tracking with a heightened attention she hadn't noticed the first time. You have declined the initial assessment, it said. I walked out of a meeting, Dara said. I didn't file anything. The walking out was the filing. She almost smiled at that. She didn't. Okay. So here we are again. The assessment is unchanged. Your biological parameters have not altered significantly in 4 planetary rotations, which is consistent with the model's projections. The tier options remain as previously presented. It paused. However, I have added a query to your file. The characteristic you referenced, self-performed structural repair, the leg. Yes. The assessment does not have a model for this behavior. You are the second case in this compound, the third in this theater, to have referenced similar events when presented with the assessment's conclusions. It pulled up a display. I wish to understand it. Dara looked at the display. Lines and numbers, and the color-coded geometric shapes of the tier system, and somewhere in the data a flag on a behavior that didn't parse. What do you want to know? She said. In the scenario you described, you were incapacitated. You had a structural fracture that prevented normal function. You were in a remote location without access to proper intervention. The correct response, according to both your preoccupation medical protocols and the assessment model, would have been to prioritize evacuation and proper treatment. I didn't have evacuation, then the correct response would have been to classify the injury as non-survivable in field conditions and what? Dara said. Stop? The administrator made the chest click. The assessment calculates survival probability under those conditions at. I know what the assessment calculates. The assessment wasn't there. Dara leaned forward slightly. She had decided, in the 4 days between consultations, that she was going to talk to this thing the way she talked to young soldiers who had grown up believing that the numbers were the whole story. Clearly, with patience and without shouting, because shouting never taught anyone anything. The assessment is a model. A model works from what it knows. What you know about humans is what you've seen humans do. You've run your machine on 14 populations, your colleague told me. How many of those were human? A pause. You are the first human population to undergo assessment. So your model for us is built on what? Biology readings, combat data, whatever your scouts sent back, pre-engagement surveillance data, population behavioral models extrapolated from other species. Dara sat back. Other species that looked at your tiers and did the math and made the rational choice. And you built your model for us on that. She looked at the eye pits. We are going to be a very bad fit for that model. Assessor 7 was quiet for a moment. This was unusual. The Veth were not given to conversational silences. You believe humans are categorically different from other assessed populations in ways that affect the model's validity. I believe, Dara said carefully, that your machine is excellent at measuring things that can be measured and completely blind to things that can't. And what it can't measure is the part that's going to give you problems. Define the unmeasurable characteristic. Dara thought about Marco, his face turned toward the sun, humming something from his mother. She thought about Yusuf's hands working the wire with that quiet patience. She thought about Ami drawing shapes in the dirt, with one eye and an expression the machine would have logged as depressive and she would have logged as stubborn. Ask me again in 6 weeks, she said. You'll have better data by then. The thing nobody outside the compound understood, and perhaps nobody inside it fully understood either, was how much of survival was administrative. Not dramatic, not defiant, not the speeches or the moments or the visible acts of resistance that became stories. Just the daily, grinding, unromantic work of keeping people alive through the accumulation of small decisions and smaller advantages, and the stubborn refusal to stop counting forward. Yusuf's wire project, which he had been working on in the corner of the yard for 11 days now, was not immediately legible as anything remarkable. It looked like an old man doing something fussy with salvaged material, which was, from one angle, exactly what it was. But Yusuf had spent 22 years as a combat engineer.
And he had a specific and highly developed theory about what the Veth atmospheric processors were doing to the humidity balance in the compound,
And what that was doing to the Veth installed monitoring systems, and what a small and carefully placed interference would do to one specific node in that monitoring network
at a specific time of the cycle.
He explained this to Dara in a low voice over 3 evenings. Sitting with their backs to a wall that he had established was a dead spot in the sensor array. It won't take down the whole system, he said. Not even close. About 3 meters of coverage for about 90 seconds, at the corner where the eastern fence meets the old crane housing. 90 seconds, Dara said. 90 seconds. And it has to be during the atmospheric processing cycle, which means it has to be between 0340 and 041, not other times. Dara thought about this. That's not an escape window. No, Yusuf agreed. It's a communication window. If someone was outside and someone was inside and they had a reason to talk for 90 seconds. Dara was quiet for a moment. Outside the compound, outside its fence, outside its systems, outside its assessment models, she had, before day 43, had soldiers. People who knew where she was and had their own reasons to want to know if she was still alive and if she had anything useful to say. How soon can you have it ready? She asked. 3 days if I can get 2 more pieces of the crane housing. 2 days if I can get 3. She nodded. She did not say good work because he knew it was good work, and she had found that the older the soldier, the less they needed to be told things they already knew. The next day, she found the pieces he needed in a pile of debris near the harbor office, and she moved them, without appearing to move them, which was a skill she had developed over 3 wars and 47 days in a compound designed by beings who thought humans were a solved problem. 2 days later, Yusuf's hands, the hands the assessment had flagged as arthritic, diminished, below standard parameters, hands that had been offered Tier 3 because the model said they were approaching the end of their productive contribution. Those hands finished the work. On day 51, at 0347, in a 90-second window of coverage darkness at the corner of the eastern fence, Dara said everything she needed to say into a stripped communication relay to a voice she had not heard in 51 days. She said it in a code that was partly military standard and partly a private language she had developed over years in the field. And she said it in 93 words because she had timed herself and knew she had the margin. The voice on the other end said 4 words back. Then the window closed. She went back to her bunk and lay in the dark and thought about Marco's song and found, somewhere in the back of her memory where childhood things lived, a song of her own. Her grandmother, in the kitchen, in the morning light, through the louvres. She did not hum it because sound carried in the compound at night, and she was still a professional. But she held the shape of it in her head. She gave it all the room it needed. Assessor 7 filed its 3rd anomaly report on day 53. The reports were accumulating in a way that was beginning to attract attention from the regional oversight tier, which was not something Assessor 7 had anticipated and not something that reflected well on the efficiency of the compound's operations. The reports described continued non-compliance with assessment conclusions across a statistically aberrant percentage of the human population. No increase in the compliance index trending in the standard direction over time. Evidence of some form of coordinated behavior in the compound that the monitoring systems had not successfully characterized. And a growing data gap in the assessment's model of human behavior that Assessor 7 was unable to fill without more consultation time, which the humans were not providing. The fourth report, filed on day 55, included an escalating notation. The notation said, "The model may require fundamental revision." This was the most alarming thing an assessment system could say. It had said it 11 times in 900 years of operation. In each of those 11 cases, the population in question had subsequently demonstrated behavioral patterns that required significant tactical recalibration. 3 of those cases had resulted in withdrawal of VETH administrative presence from the occupied territory. The regional oversight tier reviewed the notation and scheduled a senior consultation. The senior consultation was conducted not in the compound, but in the VETH command facility at the harbor, in a room that was not designed to feel like a doctor's office because it was not designed to make anyone comfortable. Dara was brought there under escort. The senior administrator was different in bearing from anything she had seen in the compound. Older in whatever way the VETH conveyed age, 3 light-sensitive pits that had a quality she could only describe as worn in, limbs that moved with the economy of long experience. It spoke without going through the assessment preamble. "We have run you through the machine 4 times, it said. The machine reports the same conclusions each time. You have not accepted any of them."
Correct.
Dara said. "We want to understand why." "Because the machine is measuring the wrong things," Dara said. "With respect, you told my colleague that you would provide better data in 6 weeks. It has been 8 days. I said 6 weeks," the administrator studied her. "You are not compliant, and you are not disrupting the compound in any way we have successfully identified. You are not forming the behavioral patterns we associate with organized resistance in the early stages." It paused. "You are doing something we don't have a classification for. That's because you built your classifications on other species," Dara said. "I told you. Tell me again." "Specifically." Dara looked at the senior administrator. Outside the facility's walls, the harbor was moving with the business of occupation. Ships loading, the hum of atmospheric processors. The ongoing function of a machine. A much larger machine than the Sherlock scanner. A machine the size of a civilization that had looked at 14 populations and processed them all, and was now processing her. "Your assessment machine is brilliant," she said. "I'm not being sarcastic. It found my spinal inflammation before I'd told anyone about it. It found Corporal Ibarra's heart condition and Private Sato's trauma markers and Marco Ruiz's cardiovascular decline. It found all of it. It knows our bodies better than we do." She paused. "What it doesn't know is what those bodies are going to do about it. That is what a predictive model." "Your predictive model is built on cost and resource and probability," Dara said. "It says this person has a condition of severity X, resource to address condition Y, therefore outcome Z. It runs that calculation, and it presents tiers, and it waits for the rational choice." She looked at the worn-in eye pits. "What it doesn't model is the possibility that some people look at option Z and say, 'I reject the premise of this calculation.' That they look at the tier that says you can't afford to survive, and they treat that not as a conclusion, but as a problem to be solved. By other means. By means your model has never seen, because no species you've assessed has done this before." "All sapient species optimize for survival," the administrator said. "Yes," Dara said. "But optimize means different things. You optimize within the parameters the assessment sets. We optimize against the parameters. We treat the parameters as the enemy. That's not irrational. It's a different kind of rationality. It took us a very long time to explain it to ourselves, honestly. Whole philosophies, but that's what it is." The senior administrator was very still. "Your compound currently contains," Dara said, "an engineer with arthritic hands who has done something your monitoring system doesn't know about yet. A 22-year-old woman with one eye who has been memorizing the shift patterns of your perimeter staff since day 8. A 63-year-old harbor pilot who knows every depth and current in this harbor down to the centimeter, and who has been sleeping 4 hours a night for the past week because he's been awake during the atmospheric processing cycles, doing something you should probably look into." She tilted her head. "Your machine told you what all of us cost. It didn't tell you what we were building. The silence that followed was the longest she had experienced in any Veth facility. The senior administrator's eye pits did not move from her. "What are you building?" it said finally. "A tomorrow," Dara said. "One that looks different from what your machine projected." She looked at the administrator with the same steadiness she had used in the first consultation, in the second, in every consultation. The steadiness that came not from the absence of fear, but from a specific human skill that the assessment had no tier for. The ability to hold fear in one hand and a choice in the other, and to use both. "You can run me through the machine again," she said. "The reading will be the same. Tier 3, non-compliant, poor prognosis. The machine will tell you I'm not worth the cost of keeping." She placed her scarred, calloused hands flat on the table between them. "The machine is not equipped to tell you what I'll cost you to lose." At Aero 340 on day 56, the atmospheric processing cycle began its low harmonic buildup, and in the moment of its peak, when the monitoring systems across the compound were running at their calculated normal, three things happened simultaneously in a sequence that had been planned by people whose capabilities no assessment had ever successfully measured. Yusuf's device opened its 90-second window. Marco, who was not where he had been placed by the Veth duty roster, was at the harbor's edge. And Dara, standing in the center of the eastern yard, looked up at the sky. The ships that came in the next hour came from outside. They came from people who had received 93 words in a code that was part military and part something older, and had done what they were known for doing when they were given the right information at the right time. Improvised, adapted, found the seam in the thing that was trying to stop them and pushed until the seam became a gap and the gap became a door. The liberation of Harbor Compound 14 was not dramatic in the way stories make things dramatic. It was loud and frightening, and it involved a great deal of confusion, and at least one moment where Dara was lying on the ground behind a crane housing thinking, with the methodical clarity of the exhausted, that she had not died yet, which remained the plan, so she should keep going. She kept going. Assessor 7 was found still at its console, still reviewing the accumulating anomaly reports, still trying to revise the model to account for data it could not have known it was missing. It had gotten very far, in the hours since the senior consultation, in understanding that the model required revision. It had not gotten far enough to understand what it should be revised to include. The answer, Dara thought later, sitting in the morning light outside the recaptured harbor office with her back against the sun-warm wall and a cup of something hot in her scarred hands, was not something that translated well into machine language anyway. It was the feeling of a tune from your grandmother's kitchen. It was hands that worked wire with patience no arthritis had touched. It was a harbor pilot, face turned to the sun, deciding every morning to be alive. It was the very specific and entirely human inability to read "the machine has spoken" as the end of the story. Marco sat down next to her. He was bleeding from a cut above his ear, and he was carrying 2 cups instead of 1, and he handed her the second one and didn't say anything for a moment. In the harbor below, the work of undoing an occupation had begun. Loud, complicated, uncertain work. The kind that went on long after the dramatic part and was arguably the harder part to survive. He started humming. Dara listened to the shape of it. Then she put her grandmother's kitchen in her head, the fried bread, the louvered light, and she hummed along, finding the harmony by feel, the way you find things in the dark when you know they're there. The assessment, somewhere in its 900 years of model data, had never recorded a species that sang. It had not thought to look.